Hello there. Welcome to Issue Space. We are a podcast and community for everyone who's working to save the world. I'm Kat Addo. I'm an inclusive social impact strategist and the creator/curator of Issue Space. And this is really an offering to all of us who get up and go to work every day to work on huge human problems. It could be poverty, criminal justice, immigration, climate change, like the list goes on. There is so much about our world that can be improved, and there are so many great minds thinking about how to do so. But what there's not always so much of is time and space to really process our work personally and professionally as individuals, and certainly as a collective. So Issue Space is meant to create a little bit of that breathing room, give professional change makers the space and the energy to hear from one another, to feel affirmed in their work, to feel re-energized. I've been in the social impact space for just about 8 years now, and I can say I feel the most grounded and affirmed and strangely validated when I can be a little bit of a mess, when I can just be a person who wants to help. And I can be a little bit confused about my role in professional change making. And I can be a little bit doubtful about what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. And I can put my hand up and say, I need a little bit of a zhuzh. I need some inspo. I need to hear from other great thinkers and doers in terms of why we're all here and why we don't give up. So this is my offering to you. Welcome, and I hope you find it inspiring and affirming as well. I am joining you from the studios of Multitude. Multitude is a podcast collective, production studio, and ad sales provider in Brooklyn, New York. And they're just lovely. If you are looking for a podcast partner who is collaborative, inclusive, thoughtful, creative, fun, respectful, all the wonderful things, I suggest you look into Multitude. They are the producer of the Issue Space podcast, and I am very happy about that. This episode of Issue Space is called Identity and the Impact Pro, where the personal meets professional. And we're going to be exploring the phenomenon of professional identity and personal identity in the context of social impact, which, spoiler, heavy overlap. This is, unless you truly tripped and fell into this space, the whole reason you're here is because you hold some set of personal values that you want to help realize in the world through your professional skill set. And I think it's a really interesting time to be talking about professional identity anyway, because there are a couple of movements among workers right now that feel really rich and sometimes also in tension. So even just looking at the corporate space, things that I've observed, on the one hand, it seems like there's an expectation or at least a hope that work will really, really reflect who you are as a person. You hear people talking about wanting to be able to be authentic at work. They want to show up as their full selves. They don't want to have to code switch, so to speak, or like put on a completely different mask and way of being and way of speaking to exist in their workplace. They want to be a part of teams that are mission-driven, organizations whose values reflect their own. So on the one hand, there's this pull to make work feel more personal than ever. But then on the other hand, there are more conversations than ever about drawing boundaries between personal and professional lives and really looking at what does balance look like in an era where most of us, until recently, have had it drilled into us to work, and do the American thing of, hi, my name is Susie, and I'm and just automatically lead the sharp point of your identity with your professional role. So I think there's a lot happening in terms of just our minds and the zeitgeist around work and who we are in general. And we have a really interesting perspective to have this conversation with today. My guest is a colleague and friend, Robert J. Ross, or Robbie as he is known to friends and family, and I guess everybody listening to this podcast. And Robbie's perspective on this is so interesting because he is the Chief Partnerships Officer of an organization called Cultivate. So Cultivate is a career development hub expressly for people and organizations whose work is mission driven. So they do things like job placement, leadership development, career coaching, kind of cohort coaching, all things professional life and identity, but in the context of social change work. And so I just find it so fascinating to think about having something of a bird's eye view over who's coming into this work, how are people moving through the work, what does like upskilling look like, and moving into leadership, like who are the characters and what are the traits and what are the patterns that we're seeing in terms of the people behind impact work. And something that I think is really interesting about Robbie's career writ large is, if I may, is that it's always had this kind of intersection of advocacy issues, but also crucially, the human force behind that change. So for example, Robbie has been an organizer of volunteers at the southern US border who were working on immigration reform and relief. Robbie has started and led student organizations about advocacy issues. He has been a chief of staff at an organization whose teams offered creative and strategic and campaigning support to mission-driven organizations and businesses, which is where I met him. So he's always really held in a way that I respect, and that's so resonant for the spirit of issue space, this idea that for every step you take forward in your advocacy work, you have to also make an investment in the people that are shaping and stewarding that work. So that's my take on Robbie. I gave a very like a flyover of who you are professionally, but Robbie, I want to invite you to say hello, and if you feel comfortable, kind of round out who you are as a whole person. If you would share with us, like maybe some places you've lived, if there's anything about how you grew up, things that can help us get to know you as a whole person. And then, because I love an icebreaker, we know what you do for your job now, but I'd love to know, what was your dream job when you were a child?
Fantastic. Well, Kat, it is such a pleasure, to be here together with you. I love the idea that you've now set expectations so high of my sort of professional background. I'm going to take us right down again. Okay, let's get real.
Lower those standards.
let's indeed. I'm sort of a like under promise, over deliver sort of guy over here. Okay, that's my jam.
Love it. Can't go wrong.
I'm such a huge fan of what you're building here at Issue Space. Thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of it in this small way. I'm so excited to be here. I also appreciate that you've set up this call in an era where it's pretty relaxed and chill politically, culturally, things are quiet out there. You know what I'm saying?
Honestly, sleepy.
Can't imagine why we're having these conversations now. I appreciate the lead up of my professional background and how I got here, where I am today with Cultivate. Maybe to just round out the perspective that brought me into the space, and this is something that I bring up a lot when I'm speaking with job seekers, particularly those trying to transition into the social impact sector from private sector or beyond. I grew up in New Hampshire. I am gay, I am Jewish, and I will say with those two identities at my side, I was in the minority within many of the communities I moved through in New Hampshire. I am white. New Hampshire is predominantly white. I'm cisgender, which means the sex I was assigned at birth matches my gender identity. So in many ways, I moved through the world sort of undetected from some of those minority statuses. In other ways, I was the only menorah on the block, There was a lot of Christmas trees, every other house but mine. And let me tell you, I can get myself behind a Christmas carol, If we should get to college a cappella at some point, let's go there.
Oh my God, I have no doubt. All right.
I bring that up primarily for two reasons. One, because from an early age, I had this sense of what it felt like to be othered, what that meant for my own sense of the role of empathy in moving through the world. And importantly, because in many ways I passed as part of the dominant majority, what that meant was I was frequently in spaces where I heard the way people talk when behind closed doors, And they don't realize there are folks from within the communities, minorities or historically marginalized communities, who are actually there listening in. And so that's not my way of saying, thus, I have no faith in humanity. Quite the contrary. I think that if we can tap into that sense of otherness that I got to know from a young age, it can help us connect more authentically and more reliably with the people around us. And how do we set up systems and structures and infrastructure to guard against some of the laziness that can come from a sort of relaxed allyship instead of really questioning how and where can we be building systems that support the whole. So that's a bit on the perspective that I brought into the space when I started working here. And I've exclusively worked in this sector my whole career, the last 15 plus years or so. The question around what was the job I was going for, I have a very discreet answer for that, Kat. And this is true, and I'm just gonna lean in to the cheese. I wanted to be an ice cream person, which is to say the person in the truck that goes around the neighborhood, okay? Hear me out.
Robbie.
Okay, I'm getting head shakes from Kat right now visually.
Honestly.
Let me tell you something, okay? Talk about joy on wheels. I mean, are you kidding me? This is like delivering good humor and delicious, tasty treats, quite literally door to door. And the thing I was so transfixed by is, what does it mean to be in the truck, driving that vehicle, and seeing all of these primarily children with Pavlovian responses already drooling, running at you with joy in their eyes? I thought, if there are ways to weave joy and good humor into making a living, that is definitely something that has my eye. Am I the best driver, Kat? No. So here we are.
Sometimes life makes decisions for us. That is amazing. Never in my wildest dreams would I have guessed that you would say an ice cream person.
And I'm here to deliver. Do you understand that?
Oh my God. But I'll bite, like, no pun intended, like bringing joy, making somebody's day more positive.
Why not?
I can like get to where you are today.
That's it.
I love it. Well, maybe after this, that's what you'll do. You'll go back to your true calling.
Maybe. I'm also vegan now, which makes me insufferable. So it's just, there's complications.
Oh God. Oh my God. You always have to be a little high maintenance. Okay. Well, thank you for that. I will just set that to the side for now, but I appreciate knowing that about you. Robbie, so thank you for sharing your perspective and your background. It means a lot for you to be vulnerable and open in this space. You actually inspired this episode topic because if you remember, we were at a lunch talking about this here very idea, a conversation space for people who work in social change professionally. And I was kind of going off about like, oh yeah, social impact professionals. And you were like, helpfully, you were like, I don't identify as a social impact professional. And I was like, well, okay, great. Well, I'll just like go home. And also, how do you have your job? Like you literally work among social impact professionals, helping them become and stay social impact professionals. But the fact that you brought that up, it kind of just stuck with me and kind of opened this can of worms about, yeah, I mean, I guess at every level, people are reevaluating how they identify, probably writ large. Like a lot of the identities that we held 10 years ago are, associated with different things today. But just in the professional space, I thought it was worth exploring because, when I was talking about the different sort of like cultural shifts in the professional landscape, and you think about this idea of people wanting to draw boundaries between their personal and professional selves, that's kind of hard for a social impact professional. Like we've spoken a lot just as friends, as peers about burnout, which is always kind of like lurking just over your shoulder. And I think, to be clear, there's something hard about every single job, every single sector. I have a lot of respect for workers in general. And there are these emotional and mental and psychic overlays when the things that you're working on 9 to 5 are the same issues that might be terrifying you or at least stressing you out in your personal life, and are the same issues that you can't really escape if you go online or turn on the TV. Like it's kind of like a mental health risk in a way. But I just wanted to hear from you, like, what did you mean when you said that you didn't identify as a social impact professional first and foremost? And based on your vantage point of talking to people every day who are trying to get into the space or move through the space into new opportunities, what patterns do you see among those folks? Has the kind of like unrest and cultural shift that's in the background changed how people are relating to this work? Has it changed the traffic and volume of people looking for work or organizations looking for support on this work? I'd love to kind of just like understand the landscape from your point of view.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you've set up this question, Kat. And in particular, I'm here for the dramatic one-liner. So I'm throwing out,
All right,
I'm
great.
throwing those things out at the lunch, okay?
Nuance be damned. We'll just like everything will just be like a series of stickers and buttons.
Indeed. The more glitter, the better. Cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, a couple of things. I want to come back to this question of identifying as a social impact worker or employee or contributor. But the shortest, most compact thing I want to say right now, right up top, is my concern is around the centrality of that possible identity and the ways I have come to suspect it may hold us back. And I want to get into the nuance and a little more complexity with all of this, okay? So just in terms of the vantage point I'm operating from right now, as you mentioned at the start of this conversation, I do a lot of recruiting work for folks who are mission-driven, looking to land their next job. And to put some numbers behind that, over the last 4.5 years or so with Cultivate, through this program All Hands, we've now worked with nearly 20,000 job seekers who are looking to either land in the space or transition from within one job in the sector to another. And so, probably unsurprisingly, we've had a lot of conversations, myself and the team, with folks along the way. The other piece, the other perspective I'm bringing to this is we do leadership coaching with folks, primarily those who are in positions of senior leadership within organizations. Think CEO or executive director, COO, chief of staff. The folks who are thinking about how do we institute the right sorts of operational infrastructure to support our teams to not get in their way, especially in an era where, to your point, identity is woven through the work we do right now. Many of us feel, fairly so, our rights are under attack through legislative processes or the political narrative that's out there. The stakes are real, okay? And they do feel high for many of us for good reason. But so I bring both of those perspectives, both what do folks think as they're trying to get into the space, and then what happens once you're there. So I want to use that to break down this idea of social impact worker in two ways. The first is for folks thinking about getting into the space, that is people who have worked at less mission-oriented, say, big corporations and are thinking about making a move. Many of the conversations we have with folks are, I can't tell in this moment if I am good enough, well-suited enough, sort of ideologically aligned enough to land myself in this space. I get the impression that when I'm going to be moving through interview processes, there's a bar, and perhaps people under the surface are implicitly trying to suss out what are my particular political points of view across these 20 different issues. And if I get one of these quote unquote wrong, am I out of the running and for good reason? You know, there's a ton of anxiety related to like, I'm not sure if this space is meant for me. I want to do good. I want to contribute. I want to make this pivot, but am I the right person to do it? And part of why I'm bringing that up now is because I think people, certainly from the outside, and then we'll turn to inside this social impact space, but from the outside are perceiving what is increasingly getting an impossibly high bar that they think they must meet in order to opt in. And I believe that doesn't serve us. In an era where burnout is real, where people are getting tired, understandably so, and bouncing from positions, we need a deep bench, a massive roster of highly talented, highly passionate people coming in. And I'm concerned about the way some of these identities or rhetoric might be holding back folks who, in fact, are the right people for the job, but who feel intimidated by what they're seeing from the outside. To flip then briefly to the what's happening inside these places, I think that the centrality of social goodness as part of our identities can be somewhat dangerous. And by dangerous, I mean not setting us up for success, us as individuals, or some of the organizations at which we work. Because suddenly, any possible criticism or constructive feedback we are receiving or levying against someone else is not simply, I wonder if that task could be done differently. It's, I don't know if you are good enough, if you are aligned enough to be in this space with us now. The stakes become so high in any of these micro communications if we are putting all of our eggs in terms of how we fight for the world we believe in into the construct of us as an employee at this one place. And part of the danger there is no utopia when it comes to workplaces. And one thing I want to demystify that I hear a lot from job seekers on the outside is, wow, I can't wait to get into some institutions where they actually live by these values that I hold so dear, okay? I want that too, and I'm not here to say the whole space is nonsense everywhere you look. And we're human beings. We are broken, beautiful human beings moving through the world and in positions of power. And so there's a fallacy of, once I get there, the ways in which things are structured, the communication channels, the expectations will be perfectly aligned to enable me to realize these values. Hopefully that's increasingly the case, but this, I worry that across the board, the stakes feel too high because we're consolidating our eggs in the basket of professional identity.
So many things that you said are resonating with me so deeply. So on the point about the space being intimidating, that was literally me. I worked in the music industry for like 9 years or something before I transitioned into social impact in 2016. And I looked at jobs, didn't see myself in the skill sets at all. I mean, part of it was even less than 10 years ago, the language was different. I don't think I knew the phrase social impact to even search. So there's that. There are grains of salt to take with this anecdote, but really and truly, I remember looking at people's bios when I would go to the about pages of organizations and being so intimidated by like where they came from academically or in terms of like political pedigree and all of this stuff that like just signaled like, whether intentionally or not, it's a certain type of person and experience who is qualified to be part of making the world a better place. And to your point, we can't have like a one percenters strategy to fix all of the things that need to be fixed, to creatively innovate all of the opportunities for new, interventions and just socially supportive things. And I remember that feeling, and I remember where I ultimately landed. It was just like divine intervention that at the moment I was looking, the organization was specifically looking for people with more mainstream skill sets. So I'd been doing like brand marketing, communications, thought leadership, that kind of work in my previous industry. And they were looking for more mainstream skill sets so that they could amplify their storytelling. So it worked out. I had a really thoughtful eventual manager who was on the recruitment team who actually read my cover letter and, saw me acknowledging what the experience that I didn't have, but talking about what I could bring, and was receptive to that. But like, if I had led with the actual emotion that I felt during that job search, which was just like fear and a little bit of being discouraged and being intimidated, I wouldn't have come into this space that now I care so deeply enough and am so confident that I can positively contribute to, that I'm doing something like this, like issue space, So it does have huge implications. And then you also talked about sort of like, in my words, from what you said, the risk of complete existential breakdown.
Oh, yeah.
If you can't just like have a job and a mission that you're continually trying to improve at, but instead you're trying to like also get your sense of self through these things.
Yes.
That resonates with me a lot.
Oh my goodness. Too many of us are at most one step away from full existential breakdown on the basis of the way we perceive our identities. I've been there too. Honestly, without even the added pressure of like, are you a good enough person for social change? I completely hear that. Somebody shared
a data point with me that, or like an insight that was about how over identifying with your professional self can lead to self objectification. So, like, you're treating yourself as an object more than a person.
Wow.
And it's dehumanizing. You know, it might start from a great place of like, I'm going to be all in, I'm going to put everything I have and, you know, bring my personal worldview into this work, and it's well intended. But if you ultimately begin degrading yourself or holding yourself to impossible standards because of an over identification and self objectification, you're not in the best position to do the best work because you're not objective anymore. You're not just looking for like what's the most fair, the most true, the most helpful, the most efficient. It's about what makes me feel the best. And it's not like, you know, it can be very healing to do this work, but ultimately it's supposed to be about the work and the outcomes. It's not supposed to be therapy that you get paid for, you know, which is maybe harshly said, but it's just, that's the real deal. It's a job, you know, it's not we're talking about professional change makers. It's not volunteer work. It's not attending a march. It's every day you are going to an organization and getting a paycheck to build a vision, you know? So that super, super resonates with me.
Yeah. And as we feel this idea of like us as a commodity, any one of us as looking through that lens, talk about short-term strategy here and almost a guarantee for burnout. My partner has never worked in this space. He's only worked in the private sector. And sometimes he hears the stories I tell anonymously to my coaching clients out there, okay?
Always. Unattributed, baby.
Indeed, indeed. And he can't wrap his head around it. So, you know, just a sort of loose example here. If there's someone with less structural or positional power in an organization who has some constructive feedback or criticism for a leader, perhaps they didn't run the meeting as effectively or efficiently, maybe outcomes weren't quite clear up front, and they try to present that to the leader. And by the way, this can go in all directions here, but in this example to the leader, frequently what we hear, and I've been in this position myself, frankly, what we hear is not, hey, could you think about running that meeting slightly more efficiently next time? It's, hey, do you actually care about the communities out there that we are trying to serve? Because it really doesn't seem like you do, okay?
And based on your agenda, I would say.
Indeed. And more to the point, the more we are reifying our own identities in this hyper-specific, narrow way, the more what I just said isn't just what the leader is hearing in their mind. It is what that person is actually saying to the leader. It doesn't look like you care because consistently the stakes are rising across the board.
100%. It's like we're not immune to just the like tension, polarization, kind of witch hunty vibe, you know, like I hate to like throw tropes around, but the cancel culture-y vibe that's out there.
Yeah.
I mean, we're a part, we're not like operating separately from the society whose issues we're working on. We're a part of it. So we really, I think, have to check ourselves about, are we replicating some of the dynamics that aren't helpful, you know? So what do you think are qualities that do help people generally, I'm hesitant to say succeed, but what are the qualities in people who you've observed have longevitous careers in this space or fulfilling careers in this space? Because kind of what I'm hearing between the lines, if I flip it in terms of what doesn't serve, is a little bit of over idealism of thinking that I'm going to do this work. And it's like, it's this like weird paradox. It's like the world needs to change. So I'm going to do work making change, but I'm expecting that all of the changes have been addressed at this place where I'm going to do work on the change because it's just, you know, in another echelon. And so maybe, and I've witnessed that as well, working on teams with folks who had a hard time accepting that flaws and limitations exist, even in the context of trying to raise the standards of how we treat one another. So I would say like not so helpful, over idealism, where you're optimistic to the point of being a bit unrealistic, and freezing yourself. What have you noticed any, maybe there aren't any commonalities, but have you noticed any trends in the folks who you see thrive in their careers in social impact?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question because the answer is yes. And I think we should talk about it more. And by the way, I'm a pretty down the middle blend of that idealism and that pragmatism. So you're going to get a little of both of me here.
100.
And I don't want anyone to hear that like passion doesn't matter or we shouldn't care about doing good work in the world and thinking about its impacts happening outside the walls of our organizations. No, of course we should do those things. It's just about where's the dial? Is it ramped up incredibly high, and to what end? For what purpose? Who does that serve if those stakes feel so high all the time? I think my initial instinct in response to your question, Kat, is curiosity. I really think curiosity at core it's related to a whole bunch of different attributes that serves folks, whether they're in positions of leadership or looking to break into the space for a couple of reasons. First of all, if you're earlier in your career or you're making a career pivot into social impact, to call back on something we were talking about earlier, there's this myth that like, you all have probably figured it out already because you're fighting the good fight, you've got the causes, surely you know how to treat people well. I think there should be an assumption, frankly, for better or worse, but an important one for people coming in, that any given organization, many of which are smaller when it comes to headcount or budget, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit in the space, I'm sort of generalizing here, but broadly speaking, the idea that once you get to those places, they will require and invite a certain amount of building from the person who's now inhabiting this space versus we're inheriting a set of perfectly running systems and structures and norms that we can just take and run with. So curiosity, I think, serves us in interrogating what actually works about this system right now and what doesn't. And curiosity also helps us deflate this idea of like the us-them dynamic within an organization, particularly at different levels. Now that I am where I am in the work that I do, and I've spoken with a lot of leaders, I really fundamentally believe that so much of the organizational dysfunction, at least the type we see in this space, is due to a vacuum of communication. It's due to not knowing what the others are thinking more frequently than it is true ill intent or even difference in strategic opinion, frankly. More than anything, it's some folks have more information than others. And when that's the case, we, because of wholly understandable reasons, stress, exhaustion, precedent, we're not assuming the best from each other. But I think that holds us back collectively, because what I've seen is when folks, including leaders, can bring curiosity to the table and say, okay, maybe I would have run that advocacy campaign slightly differently than or maybe dramatically differently than the folks who I had positioned to do that. Let me try to understand and disentangle what inputs were they bringing into the way they made those decisions, and how can I broaden my own understanding of what this work could look like through the lens of what they did, instead of what frequently in this culture can be driven by urgency, which leaves very little time for like actual meaningful exchange and understanding in all ways across the organization. So yeah, curiosity.
Completely. And what you're saying about assumptions, it's so interesting. You were talking about how assuming the worst of each other leads to disconnect, which feels very true and intuitive. At the same time, I feel like assuming 100% alignment is just as dangerous. Because
Sure.
to your point about urgency, I feel like in social impact, sometimes we're using just the fact that we're all in this kind of work as a shorthand for like, yeah, we all have the exact same worldview, you know? And for the number of times I've sat in social impact spaces and listened to the phrase, blank community is not a monolith, like we kind of treat this professional community like a monolith. Like we couldn't possibly have differences of opinion on whether it's like certain policies or just like the way things should manifest, you know, like we're still different people.
Incremental change versus burn it all down.
Exactly. 100%. There's always a gradient. There's always like a spectrum and a mix of different perspectives, which is a good thing. But I think when there isn't, going back to your insight, when there isn't curiosity about what are those differences, it can make, I've just seen people like run straight forward with their own very clear idea of what success looks like. And then when it's slightly different from that, going back to the point about existential breakdown, they kind of have like a professional breakdown of like, where am I? Who are you? I trusted you. I thought we could work together. Now it's all ruined. It's all for naught, you know? And it's like, well, maybe we should have done some alignment on the front end about like, let's just say out loud how we're all thinking about this issue and how we're all thinking about certain solutions to avoid miscommunications and unmet expectations later, you know?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Making the implicit explicit.
Ooh.
That's the jam.
There's our first button.
That's it.
There's our first sticker.
Slap it on a bumper sticker.
Everything.
Someone. It probably obviously takes more time up front to have that sort of explicit alignment, but the whole conceit behind it is it dramatically saves enormous time later on when inevitably those types of misses pop up in other ways, certainly less desirable ways down the road.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've been talking a lot about what we observe as people within this professional landscape. I'm curious if you have perspective on the perceptions of people in this professional landscape from people who aren't or aren't yet in it. So, for example, well, I don't want to color what you're going to say, but
color it, my friend.
Just can't help myself. So I was looking at some insights about the perceptions of activists. And I will commit to the things that we're referencing, kind of collating and putting them in like show notes or something like that so people can know that we're not just making stuff up. Somebody said it at some time. But it was about how negative perceptions of activists, which I would kind of extrapolate to being at least related to the professional landscape of social change, actually set back efforts to make said changes, you know? So for example, there can be sentiments, I think we're seeing this a lot right now that we're kind of in like the backlash era of everybody have a social mission, be inclusive, you know, all of the energy that was built up over the past few years is now really, really being, I mean, to put it mildly, challenged. You use the word attacked. I think that's very accurate. Defunded, you know. But on the personal level and in terms of like the people doing the work, there can be a perception that they are like rigid, aggressive. There can be a perception that's related to other aspects of identity intersecting with that professional identity. So with women who are activists, there can be a perception that they're overbearing. Like we've heard that anytime a woman wants to just like ask for something. There's like a perception that she's overbearing. And also the word biased was used. There can be a perception that marginalized groups who are working on social change are aggressive again, and that privileged groups who are working on social change are either altruistic in this kind of like halo effect or superficial, less flatteringly. So I just feel like those are specific insights from that set of data, but I feel just in my bones like this mistrust. And that's where I feel almost from the outside in, that's where I feel some of the negative assumptions the most strongly. And when you take that with some of the dynamics we were talking about earlier, like the space appearing kind of exclusive, you know, kind of intimidating, like maybe elitist in places, it just seems like no matter how good the talent is, you know, it shouldn't matter, but we're human beings, so it does. There's a likability factor to this workforce as a collective that's really important to advancing the changes that we want to see and just being collaborative, especially in this hyper polarized moment where like, for some reason, everybody believes that you never have to have a nonpartisan collaboration ever again, you know? Like, so I'm just curious if you have any experience encountering negative thoughts or negative stereotypes of change makers, or if your talent pool has ever, you know, brought anything to you, if you've ever coached somebody through feeling like an imposter or feeling like they don't present in the most favorable way.
Yeah, I want to keep building the picture of where are we right now to then hone in and answer the question you've posed here. So what else is happening out in the world right now? An era of hyper polarization. You mentioned cancel culture earlier. I have a strong bias and opinion at this point. I've really thought about it over the years, and I've gotten to a place where I feel deeply in my bones and my soul that cancel culture does not serve us. It is not the tool of choice that will get us where we need to be collectively. And I believe that for a whole host of reasons, including the types of energy it activates in people who are participating in cancel culture. I do not think it is our better angels at play when we are jumping into that, no matter the outcome that we're working towards. So that's a bias that I have. There will be others who disagree and, welcome that. Speaking of not a monolith in the space. So that's thing one. Thing two is you mentioned defunding. Funding in this space right now, at the time of recording this podcast, okay, funding is not what we, as the players, the insiders here for a while, have been hoping it would look like at this point in the game. We really thought as the economy was starting to turn around, we'd be in a different position than we are now. If you work at a nonprofit, whether you are more service-oriented and apolitical or expressly political or electoral in nature, and you are finding funding is lower than ever. Philanthropies and foundations and donors are not coming through with the amount of funding we need to keep the lights on and operate at the levels we'd hope to. If you work at a for-profit, mission-driven organization, a communications firm, or a tech platform that builds tools for social good, you're not seeing the sorts of clients or consumer uptake that you would have expected now. And that strain is real. So why am I saying that? It's because it is true, looking at those facts alone, we aren't getting it perfectly right now. Whatever we're doing, whatever we are trying, let me tell you something, we have not found that solution, okay? The times are quickly evolving. So at minimum, back to curiosity, thinking through, okay, what is it about the way we're waging these battles out there, these challenges, the narratives we're sowing, what parts of them serve us and which don't? One quick anecdote I've been thinking about in relation to this conversation, Kat, there was this story of a pretty high ranking in terms of the pyramid of hierarchy employee at a social impact organization who was rumored within their team to have basically launched this campaign on their way into a pretty major surgery that they were receiving. And then subsequently, as they were awaking, okay, on the other side of this surgery, I'm talking in the hospital bed, jumps back in to see what's going on the other side. And the way I was told this set of stories, there were folks within the organization who expressed concern, question, what's going on here? What is the system within which this person feels perhaps compelled? It feels like that's probably not just their let me just do this today because it's going to make me feel so good. Probably there are forces at play and pressures that are leading them there. And so when this conversation began, there was a leader at the organization who subsequently said, do you think during World War II, people were getting as much rest as they hoped? I don't think so. Let's assess where we are right now. Okay, so cool. Thank you for that historical foray, okay? My point in giving that story is not that the stakes aren't high right now. And that's really important to emphasize. Indeed, the stakes are high right now. In the US context, in many ways, democracy feels more fragile than ever, okay? Let alone all of these other issues that are interconnected to that. My point is, I don't think it serves us if we are approaching every day like it is the height of crisis, because I don't think that's sustainable. And as someone who burned out pretty hardcore myself in the past, and as one of many who describes that, that's not a long-term strategy, my friends. It's just not. Even if you feel that true in your heart, I don't think that's going to get us where we need to be. And so to the original question, I'm concerned that it's kind of the my way or the highway, it's all or nothing mentality that people might perceive from the outside. I don't think that's serving us.
Such good points. Such good points, and so much in there. I'm still horrified at the person rolling over. I'm picturing ass out in a hospital gown. Like I'm picturing that it's pretty bleak. Like,
It's grim for sure.
like
Yeah.
bracelet on and just like, let me just like hop into Slack. Like I can't.
Yeah, yeah, it's rough. I don't think
Oof.
this was like a new age sort of like rave inspired hospital room where they were having a good time, cocktail in
Oh,
hand. Like
God
that's
bless
not the
them.
vibe. Okay.
God bless them. Oh my God. And yeah, I mean, it just harkens back to what we were saying about where your identity makes it feel inescapable. Like, do we want people to lean all the way out? No. Do we want people to stay alive to help us sustain ourselves so we can see through the changes that we need to make? Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be a great place to start.
Certainly wouldn't hurt, would it?
Yeah, let's give it a shot. Okay, so this has come up like woven throughout the conversation. So I want to talk a little bit about the role of political partisanship in social impact work and just across the landscape of social impact workers. It's kind of in the background of all of these conversations. I'm just thinking back, like you see me staring into space. I'm just thinking back that like in the arc of my time in the space, I feel that when I entered the space, we used to lead with the spaces that I was in would be led with announcing like this is a progressive effort, and now I don't feel that that's as close to the fore. I'm thinking across like my client landscape and just like colleagues and peers, like it's not really being spoken about in the same way. And actually, in that same lunch that Robbie and I were in, where this topic came up, somebody else advised, like, oh, you're starting this space for professionals working on social change. Make sure it's not too progressive. And I was like, okay. I mean, hopefully this is needless to say, but I have no interest in contributing further to polarization. I'm not on like an ideological indoctrination mission. Like that is not what this is. But at the same point, I was like, I don't know if that's up to me. I think the space is what it is and encapsulates the people and the worldview and the efforts that it does. And I don't know that any individual can play that up or down believably. So I thought we'd invite a third voice into the conversation, Marissa Cabas. Welcome, Marissa. Marissa is the creator of The Handbasket, which is an independent journalistic newsletter and website that covers politics, media, gender, and where those things converge. She's also a columnist for MSNBC and has written a bunch for cultural institutions like BuzzFeed, Rolling Stone, HuffPo. I'm sure there are others. But when I met Marissa, we were working in the context of social impact campaigning. And Marissa was running editorial or kind of like narrative driven campaigns for social causes and also innovating civic engagement interventions. So I remember, Marissa, you created this platform, Crush the Midterms, that allowed people to crush the midterms, as it were, a few years back. So I thought that I would invite you to this conversation because short of actually, I think, working in a politician's office or on a campaign, you're like as far out in front with this is how I identify politically. This is the lens that I'm looking at social change through. And I just think that it's fascinating. So I'd love to hear your perspective on partisanship in the space. But before that, same prompts as Robbie. If you feel comfortable just sharing with us a little bit about where you're from, your background, maybe places you've lived or how you were raised, and then what your dream job was when you were a child.
Sure. Well, I'm so happy to be here. This is so exciting. Yeah, I'm Marissa Cuvis. I grew up on Long Island. I write a lot about being from Long Island, for better or worse. I went to school in Washington, D.C., but otherwise have lived in New York all my life. I studied abroad in Copenhagen. That's it. And I'm Jewish. And I grew up in an area that was very Jewish, which was very different than Robbie's experience. I thought that everyone was Jewish growing up. Like, I would say close to 50%, which is just wild when you look at the percentage in the world. So I grew up with a very different worldview and sense of what it means to be Jewish and how that manifests in your daily life. So it's just an interesting juxtaposition with Robbie. And I often wonder, like, how different would it have been if I grew up in a place where being Jewish wasn't the norm? But I guess I'll never know. And what I wanted to do when I was a kid, well, in third grade, we had to like dress up as someone, like a famous person. So I dressed up as then First Lady Hillary Clinton.
Oh my God.
Oh.
There it is. Bullseye.
And like, I'm kind of disappointed in myself in retrospect, because why didn't I dress up as Bill Clinton? Like,
That's true.
Yes.
like my aspiration was to be first lady. No, I don't care about China patterns that much, honestly.
Ouch.
No.
Big drag king energy.
Oh, I
Let's go.
love. I can see it with the silver hair like flicked back.
Yes.
Yeah, just came in as Bill. That would really rock third grade. So I think my aspiration was always to do something in politics, but I wasn't sure if it was to be a politician or to write about politics. And I guess I wanted to be public facing. I grew up doing theater like Robbie.
I didn't even know all of these like commonalities.
Class thespian. Hello.
Yeah, I could have guessed.
Really?
TBH.
Wow, I didn't see it at all. I missed it.
Thank you. And wow, Robbie, rude.
Yeah, what does that say exactly? Is that a pejorative? I don't know.
I'm also a Leo, and there's just like a lot going on. Yeah. But that's all to say, I started writing for my school newspaper in middle school. And then by high school, I was in journalism class. I was editor-in-chief my senior year. I went to college for journalism. So there was a pretty clear path fairly early on for where I was going to end up. And I feel like I knew myself at a pretty young age.
That's beautiful. I also just like would like to pause to acknowledge like justice for journalists and comms people. A brief anecdote. When I first got in social impact, a person who was senior to me in the space told me not to mention communications because it sounded too frivolous. And I feel like if you contrast when I started in literally October 2016 to now, it's like, this is what we were talking about. This is the battleground, that's the medium, the written word, the spoken word. I think whether you feel personally passionate about it or not, you kind of have to respect that it matters. And it's a hugely driving force in culture and politics. So I think it's really powerful. The path that you wound up on, in my mind, is not less powerful because you didn't go into like being a politician yourself. I think in some ways it's more powerful to be talking about what we observe and having the freedom to really do so without having to like maintain the talking points.
Veneer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, but I think it should be said that my path here was not easy. I went to journalism school. I graduated during the height of financial crisis. My first job was doing PR for peanut butter.
Oh,
Jif peanut butter.
Okay, smooth or crunchy?
All the varieties. Natural.
Equal opportunity, great, yeah.
Yeah, it was when natural peanut butter was first becoming really big. Yeah, so I was just like, I need to do something adjacent to writing, which like you said, is communication. So it's like you always, if you want to do something, you have to find different ways in. There's not always one specific way, particularly now when journalism is so tricky and it's just as difficult, if not worse, than when I graduated, however many years ago, I won't say. But you really have to fight your way in there. And so I, worked in journalism for a while, finally, after my peanut butter days. And then I worked in the social impact space with the two of you. And that was my first time ever working in that space. And I got there because of my editorial skills and my political knowledge and my interest in politics, but it's not something I'd ever envisioned myself doing. But I started, I didn't realize, like, not too long after UCAT, in like the early spring of 2017, I think. And so we know that was quite the time in the world. But I think it gave me the chance to connect with that like more political part of myself actually, which is interesting because you're talking about how like in this space that like there is this hesitancy to kind of pull back your politics maybe a little bit or maybe or just be less partisan. Not everyone feels that way obviously, but like you were talking about that a bit, and I felt like I was able to really fully go into politics for the first time because I had this very specific role. And so, like you mentioned, Crush the Midterms, it was an online interactive platform where people could fill out a quiz about themselves and then get a personalized plan for how to volunteer during the 2018 midterms. It was a really big success. We did a podcast around it, which was really fun. I recorded it from one of the little phone booth rooms with like a blanket over my head.
I love it.
Classic.
Showbiz, baby.
So glam. So glam. After the midterms, we tried to do some other things, and it just like the, political cycles and being tied to the election cycles is like a whole different beast, and it ebbs and flows a lot more than like, pure social impact work, which is necessary all the time, every day, all day, every day. And so I kept finding myself being drawn back to journalism and to writing. And I freelanced a little while I was doing the social impact work. And I guess it just ended up feeling like that was the truest expression of like how I wanted to put things into the world. And I felt like you said, I am kind of on the front lines. And it can be a scary place to be, but I find that actually, talking about being progressive and taking on that partisan lens is helpful for me professionally, because it helps me define myself, and it also helps me define my own values and how I see myself. And it's really important to have a clear view of myself if I'm going to present my thoughts to the world.
That's so true. I love so many things that you said. One, I think there's a beautiful testament in your story about the version of the sector that we want to see, to allude to something Robbie was talking about earlier about just being inclusive, where you can bring your skill set from where, kind of a come as you are, and you can bring that mix of your skill set and your insight and your passion and the direction you want to go and help contribute to positive change. And then I'm intrigued, you said that you were kind of contrasting like the cyclical nature of political work with the relatively like more steady nature of social impact work. I just want to ask like a blank question, because like now I feel confused. Now being questioned about things, sometimes I'm like, wait, what? So I'm curious, in your view, is social impact work as we mean it, trying to advocate for rights for more people, rights and protections, wanting to think about how we sustain the environment, working on all of this kind of systemic issue spaces that I rattled off at the beginning, like you might be working in criminal justice, like immigration reform, what have you. Do you think that social impact work is inherently big P progressive? And I'll note that over my years in the sector, I have been in spaces with folks and organizations that don't identify as left. They might be like center or even center right, particularly when I was supporting work around criminal justice, because I think criminal justice has had there's more of like an ingoing understanding that like we're going to need to collaborate across the aisle, so to speak. So I find that many people are more open to starting from a nonpartisan place, or at least an inclusive place of the whole political spectrum. But I still think my observation is that the diversity within the space doesn't necessarily make the objectives less progressive. I just don't see them mapping to many conservative priorities as they exist now and as they're presented today. But I'm just curious your vantage point, because this is more your beat.
Sure. Yeah, I think that being progressive means you have a set of values, right? And when it comes down to it, it's about a generally understood set of values that one holds. I don't think to do social impact work, you have to necessarily be progressive like identify as one, but you're representing progressive values. Like if we were to map them to politics, that's where they're going to go. Like you said, you're not connecting most of this work to conservative politicians. And I think that also connects to something that I believe, which is that everything is political. And I think a lot of people, not so much anymore because politics is just everywhere now, but used to say I'm not really a political person, or like I don't really pay attention to politics, and those people definitely still exist. I feel like we're in a bubble of people who pay attention, but I do feel like there's more a wider awareness than there used to be. So it used to be kind of uncool to say you like cared about politics, like you were kind of a dweeb, and now it's like, oh, I care about politics because and you tell people that because you think it says something about you as a person, I think. And it says that you care about your community. I think that part of it is kind of bipartisan, in that like I could see conservatives saying, I'm political, I care about XYZ. We may not agree on what that is. But, I think that it comes down to you look at the world around you, like the way you got your water supply and the way your electricity comes in and the way that you get unemployment benefits and everything is political. And so I think to try and divorce it from progressivism is not necessarily a useful exercise for anyone. I think owning your point of view and your values and the types of people you align with is an important thing for people to know about you.
Very true. I love the idea of even your everyday intricacies being political, like brought to you by politics and politicians. Absolutely.
Everything comes from somewhere. And nearly all those things, aside from like your Amazon packages, come because of a political decision that was made for you by your representatives.
It's so true as well about now. It's a lot more widely practiced and accepted and maybe expected to be politically engaged, at least on the cultural end of politics, than a few years ago. I love what you said about owning a point of view. And there is a little bit of just, none of us wants to contribute to further polarization, but also like you can't equivocate, you can't hem and haw. It gets in the way of getting things done and signaling to people that you want to be in coalition. On that note, do you think the social impact professional landscape, because you have worked in it, do you think it is unwelcoming to people who don't identify as politically progressive? And if so, do you think that that's a problem?
I would say, I mean, I can't speak for every organization. I've only worked at one. I think there is a place for moderation. I think there is a big place in social impact for people who identify as more moderate. I don't think, in fact, because a lot of people work in organizations and there is this, hierarchy, it's more like a company, it's more a corporate type feel that draws people who are potentially more, a little bit more in the middle or want to work within the system more, at least, who don't want to just organize on their free time or have their own like nonprofit. They want to work within a large existing structure with very complicated grants and large amounts of money coming in. And that's not necessarily something that that really hardcore progressives are going to want to do. Meeting with wealthy benefactors and the donors who are going to contribute to these organizations and having to make nice, like that's not for everyone. And I think I realized it wasn't for me, especially. It's a really specific skill to be able to do that, to be able to get the right people to give money, because that's what makes the world go round. And so just to tie it back, it's like, I don't know that you necessarily have to be like a hardcore progressive in order to work in social impact spaces. I think, especially if you have specific issues that you're really zeroing in on, it can probably feel a little bit more separate from electoral politics, at least.
Such a good point. I love that. And it kind of harkens to Robbie and our conversation about what qualities or worldviews allow people to be successful in this space. I think there is an element, as Marissa's saying, of like acceptance. If you're doing it as a professional with a job that kind of in ways mirrors quote mainstream jobs, there's some level of acceptance that, okay, I'm not off the grid. I'm going to go to work. I'm going to cash paycheck. I'm going to get a W-2, like all the things I'm going to have, whether it's clients or funders, as you say, Marissa, partners, all of which is imperfect.
And people are watching your social media.
Yeah.
People are aware of that.
Social media is stressful. I don't have the capacity to discuss social media at this time, but terrifying.
I respect your privacy.
terrifying.
I really appreciate the texture and, dare I say, some of the almost counterpoints that you've been bringing up, Marissa, to add some complexity to what we've been talking about. And by the way, can't wait to see you at theater camp this summer for our production of Into the Woods.
Oh my God.
You're reminding me that there are many people in this space, myself included, who acknowledge there are those who will believe it is their role, it is their calling to work within the system. And there are those who believe it is their calling and their mode of impact to work from without. And so this question of like the pragmatists and the radicals, the idea that like I myself, just speaking personally, I've played both sides of that field, as it were, okay? And still do in my personal life, in my professional life, I toggle between these pieces. What would this space look like and what could the world become if we genuinely believed, even if we disagree on some of the tactics to get where we're headed, if we genuinely believed that the ecosystem as a whole was stronger because of our divergent tactics that in some way can mutually reinforce one another here. I really do believe that. And, again, take all of this with the grain of salt of like, there's some baseline foundational shared values we need to be able to have, okay? When we go into a space, we need to believe fundamentally that everyone's identities deserve to exist, should have access to some, baseline equal rights. Yes, okay. Recognizing that, I also believe that our ideas, our pathways to change, they could get better through conversation and through kicking the tires, lest we get too caught up in the one idea that's attracted us that isn't serving us ultimately in the future. That sort of dialogue could be tremendously powerful. It can be, it is, when it happens out there. But how do you build that container? I think it's curiosity and mutual respect.
Right. I love the call to kind of keep evolving. Like, a certain worldview is going to bring you into your work, but that doesn't mean that you have to remain rigid. And it's actually talking about progressivism. I feel like it's antithetical to progress and progressivism to stay so deeply rooted.
I took a note down before when the two of you were talking that you should be willing to own your past views and maybe your past mistakes publicly. Also, for someone like me who's public facing, I've written things and posted things in the past that I no longer agree with myself because it was a while ago or maybe not even that long ago. But like, people shouldn't, you shouldn't let your past self prevent you from getting into the work now. So even if you're coming to it later, even if you've had like a more progressive awakening in the last few years, even if you used to be more of an activist and you want to come more into like a more corporate kind of, system role, there's always, like you said, this ability to evolve in the way that you impact the world and don't let your past hold you back.
You're out here saying like, we should just air our dirty laundry. Okay. How much time? Olive Garden, favorite restaurant. I'm sorry. Like, it's out there. Okay.
Unapologetically you. Oh my gosh.
Let's go bottomless salad, breadsticks. Okay.
We'll do a bonus episode with just like all our unpopular opinions.
Thank you so much for that perspective, Marissa and Robbie. I feel similarly to you. It's like, to your point about evolving ideas, it's like adding to what we've already discussed. So I can say even my thinking is a little bit different at the end of this conversation than the beginning. That is the time that we have for today. But I'm so appreciative that each of you would make time to come here and share openly in the space. And, I think these kinds of anecdotes and discussions create a lot of breathing room for people who might be holding some of the pressure, Robbie, that you introduced about feeling like I need to be perfect, or Marissa holding shame from like ways that they've been that they think don't align with this work or that there's no room for them. I mean, this just isn't the time in history to be thinking that way. So I thank you for sort of modeling that openness. And I would love to, so there are options for your outro prompts. You can
Oh,
answer one of them, you can answer multiple. I just invite you to share what keeps you motivated in social impact work. What is one thing you want listeners to take away from this conversation? And or is there anything exciting that you're working on that this community should know about?
Kat, I really appreciate this space you've created today and issue space more broadly. Really, truly, I'm out there engaging with hundreds of different organizations doing important, impactful work. I haven't seen anything like this before, to have genuine, candid, in some ways vulnerable conversations about the waters within which we swim that frequently can't audit. We're too close to it to see what's happening here, and that really doesn't serve us. So thank you for that. I feel impassioned by this work because at core, despite forces that would lead us toward fatalism, and I'm not going to pretend I'm feeling, Pollyanna optimistic every single day, I do fundamentally believe in the power to change systems. And part of why I believe that is because I believe it is possible for people to change, which is to say people to evolve their ideas and evolve their capacities. Frequently we talk about a future where, well, if only once a certain subset of people are gone or out of the picture or age out, then we'll have the justice we need. I really believe, because I've seen it myself in my own life, in my work personally, that even those I think are most heels dug in to various issues connected to any of this or beyond, they can change. In fact, they do change, because life is fluid in ways that sometimes we forget. And that fundamentally makes me feel better about moving forward. Just quick shout outs for those who are thinking about jumping into the space or staying in the space. We mentioned at the beginning some of the recruitment work I get to touch. We do have a community of job seekers called All Hands, all-hands.us, if that's cool to say. And if not, we are cutting it out. Great. That's a free service for US-based mission-driven job seekers to land their next gig, primarily those looking for full-time work. And then also a coaching community, one-on-one, cohort-based for those looking on leadership or executive coaching once they're in roles in social impact. That's a community we have called Team Assembly, teamassembly.org, and all of that lives under Cultivate. And hopefully, collectively, we all feel there is a place for us in this space. I promise you there is room, and we really do need all hands on deck right now. So jump on in.
Thank you, Robbie.
I think what keeps me motivated is that I do continue to see new people come into the space, and people have a genuine curiosity about things that they don't understand. And I feel like education is such an important piece of what I do, and education that sparks conversations. I really believe in the power of conversation more than ever. And that's always been the way that things have happened, right? It's, before we had social media, before we had phones, before we had anything, we talked to one another. And despite all those changes in the, physical reality, that doesn't change. I've been really inspired recently by my mom, who she learned about Project 2025, the conservative blueprint for the next presidential administration, and she's been telling everyone she knows about it. And she is like, "Have you heard about it?" And she'll kind of zero in on a piece that she thinks will resonate with them. And she said a few people have seemed genuinely interested. They talked for a while. So I think we just have to keep talking to each other, because if we put up walls, then we'll never get through them. So even if you have a wall, make a little opening, a little doorway, so that some stuff can filter through. If people want to follow my work, you can subscribe at http:// and I'm at Marissa Kibis on all the social platforms pretty much. And I just love talking to new people. So reach out.
Wonderful. Beautifully said. You can tell who the writer is. If we put up walls, we'll never get through them. It's like a warm bath. I love a good metaphor. Oh, thank you both so much. And thank you to everybody who's listening, who made time for us in your day. I hope that we've been a positive force in your professional and maybe your personal life. Join the community and learn more about us at issuespacemedia.com. And we'll see you next time.